Dear all, welcome to the doctoral defense of Ari Heljakka, where his thesis will be presented for examination for the degree of Doctor of Technology. The title of the thesis is Deep Generative Neural Network Models for Capturing Complex Patterns in Visual Data. The opponent in the defense will be Professor Ole Winther from the Technical University of Denmark. Professor Ole Winther is a well-known scientist in the field of machine learning, and his research interests span a wide range of topics, such as variational methods, deep learning, and approximate Bayesian inference. As the official custos appointed by the Aalto University School of Science, I declare this defense open. Ari, you are welcome to present your part.
Honored custos, honored opponent, ladies and gentlemen, I will now present an introduction to the topics in this thesis, which lasts about 20 minutes, and I will focus largely on a high-level overview of these topics instead of going into technical details, which we will cover then later during the discussion with the opponent. So, in order for you to follow the course of this presentation and this thesis defense, I recommend that you look into the online dissertation, and you can also find this link in the web page. Sorry, on the chat of the Zoom session itself. Just as a technical check, I think I will remove. Yes, now this looks better. So the structure of the introduction is such that I will first focus on the high-level motivating questions behind this dissertation, and then on some of the prior work on the related topics. Then I will list the concrete research questions and then cover each of the publications contained in this dissertation in the form of a brief summary, one by one. So the dissertation itself contains these 5 publications and a comprehensive introduction to these topics written by me. I would especially highlight the publication number 3 and 5, which are the deep automodulators, which was accepted to the NeurIPS conference, which is one of the most respected artificial intelligence conferences out there, and also publication number 5 accepted to the Triple AI, which will appear in February, so next month. All of these publications have already been peer-reviewed and accepted to these conferences, and at the last paper, which will be published in February, will actually be slightly different from the version that you have in the thesis book itself, because of the timing of the sending of the final version of the paper to the conference versus the printing of the book. So the primary question that we are trying to address on a very high level is to make computers understand what they see. So in order to achieve this goal, we want the computer not only to be able to process images as a kind of binary zeros and ones and to show them, but also to understand that what does it mean that in this picture there is a dog, or in this picture there is a face of a human being, and so on. To this end, we utilize machine learning. So we want to train the computer models to deal with this, to learn the representation of these things. And specifically, we will be focusing on deep neural networks, which is a mathematical theory and kind of a branch of artificial intelligence technology that dates back about 60 years ago and has also been pioneered in Aalto University or Helsinki University of Technology already in the 70s by Seppo Linnanmaa, and since then and before that by dozens and hundreds of researchers. And most of the breakthroughs that you have seen on the news during recent years have usually been related to the neural networks. Importantly, we will be focusing on generative models. So a generative model is a computational model that is able to create complicated data structures from scratch For example, a generative model can draw a picture of a dog or a cat or a face, or even three-dimensional structures and so on. And this should be contrasted with the perhaps more well-known and more widely used computer vision models, which are called discriminative. So if you have a model that tries to distinguish between cats and dogs or recognize people, these are what could be called discriminative models, which are very efficient and when you try to classify things, but they have the fundamental limitation that if, for instance, you try to distinguish a cat from a dog, you might be able to do it just based on noticing that the dog's ears are different from cat's ears, so you might not need to learn anything about the fact that they both have 4 legs and so on. Whereas in generative models, you do have to learn all of these details in order to actually generate and draw these images. Furthermore, we will be focused on unsupervised training. So we want the models to be learning these things only from the data itself, instead of giving auxiliary information about what is in this picture or what is on that picture, even during the training time. And a working hypothesis and a kind of motivating principle behind this work for me has been the idea that this generating of samples requires the model to have an internal representation that is fundamentally more powerful than the representation required to just do the discrimination. So this is kind of a high-level principle that cannot be, that probably cannot be proven, but this is kind of the working hypothesis. So we want to make computers understand what they see by sort of imagining it and being able to create it. This allows for learning more generalizable representations, which means that we can use these models then potentially for a wider range of downstream tasks. And crucially, this allows something that could be called semantic editing, and this kind of pulls together various applications that I will now explain in a bit more detail. But first, I will give an example of what is semantic editing by mentioning what it is not. So in traditional editing, if you, for example, have a photograph and you want to add a smile on this photograph, you would normally start by painting some pixels and lines and so forth. But in semantic editing, we instead want the model to first learn everything there is about faces, like that faces have lips and eyes and so forth. And then we want the model to just give us basically a slider like this that allows us then to start changing these attributes, so we don't have to draw anything. The computer will do the drawing for us. So if we want to add smile, we just move the slider and add more and more and little bits more of the smile. So we just move the slider and the model is supposed to know that, okay, now I'm supposed to be adding more of the smiling. Or if you want to like add sunglasses, you could again go to the sunglasses slider and you could start adding it, and now you're seeing regular glasses and you're moving towards darker and darker glasses, and okay, now it looks like real sunglasses. So these kind of things we want to be able to do, and this kind of training we want to do in unsupervised manner as far as we can. And this has been focused on most of these papers here, or one of the focus points. You can do all kinds of attributes, like here it's also showing some like rotations of the face and turning male faces to female faces that still look kind of the same, and so on. Furthermore, you can interpolate between faces, so you can take the input faces at the corners here and then get find intermediate versions of the faces. And if you would try to do this by just averaging pixels directly, you would get pretty horrible looking outcomes. But here, because the model has learned these features of the faces properly, you can take any of the intermediate faces here and it will still look sensible. An even more complex example of semantic editing would be what is called style mixing. So one of these models allows us to take any input image. You could take a photograph of your own face right now and put it into this model, and take another image, and then you could choose. You could decide that okay, you want to take like the face expression of that other image and apply it on your own face image, and then you would get hopefully a sensible mixture that would show image of your face smiling, and so on and so on. And also, I would like to emphasize that even though all of these papers in this dissertation are about image manipulation, these general principles and this whole paradigm of designing based with these generative models, this is much wider than just 2D images. So these general ideas should be applicable to 3D structures, molecules, buildings, videos, and all kinds of data content. Of course, you need to change the details of these algorithms and model architectures, but the same principles apply. And this should provide for a kind of paradigmatic shift in the way we design things. So prior work on these topics is wide, and I will only say a few general things about it. Two most well-known families of generative models are variational autoencoders, VAEs, and generative adversarial networks, or GANs. So the VAE is a mathematical theory that can be, in practice, summarized in this very high-level image or illustration on the right. So a VAE takes in an image like the one on the left, the face image on the left, and it compresses it into this very short latent representation. In our case, it's always actually like 512 numbers. So it's a very short vector of numbers. And this is kind of the compressed representation, analogous to when you would zip or compress an image file, and then the VAE can decode it back into image space like you would decompress an image with a regular compression utility. But the key thing here is that we expect that the VAE latent code is smart in such a way that it allows us to do various smart semantic editing manipulations. Of course, these representations in the latent space are expected to have also various other more theoretically interesting properties, but I will not go into these in this introduction. Instead, I will focus on these concrete aspects of it. But in reality, what happens with the regular VAE is that we get very blurry outputs for the images, even at very low resolution. So these are not very practically useful for image manipulation. GANs, on the other hand, excel at producing these extremely realistic images as an output. But it happens that the GAN models are such that even though you can take the generator out of those models and turn it into our decoder part, you do not have the encoding part that would actually tell you which latent codes you need. So you will like end up getting something else. So GANs are originally intended to create random samples only. So you need to somehow extend them to manipulate existing images. People have done this, of course, in various ways, and I will just highlight a few of them. So one approach is to somehow combine VAEs and GANs, and one and perhaps the earliest popular method of doing so was actually in Larsen and 2016 paper, which incidentally was done in the research group of our honored opponent. And there have been other combinations like this, and they are basically structured in such a way that you have the encoder of the VAE and the decoder of the VAE, and then you have a discriminator network like you would have in GANs, and you can combine these in various different ways. But there's an alternative way introduced in Uliano 2018 paper called Adversarial Generative Encoder Network, which is different in such a way that it only has the encoder and decoder, and these networks compete with each other, and they also manage to produce sharper outputs in that way. The benefit of this model is that all else being equal, it's a smaller network in total, so it has a lot less parameters than these combinations that use external discriminator. But the problem with HE was that it was very unstable to train, and that this was something that we needed to improve upon in order to actually use it in practice. One final point about the prior work, a very different approach to semantic editing relevant to this dissertation is called image-to-image translation. So this is an approach where you train a model to do one or a few very specific transformations, like turning zebra images to horse images and vice versa, or summer scenes to winter scenes and these kind of things. I'm referring here only some of the old work that was done prior to the paper in this dissertation. Of course, people have extended these things later on. But the weakness in this approach is that you're only training the model to do just like one kind of transformation as a starting point. So that is not in itself not very useful for wider applications. So now we summarize the research questions motivated by these previous observations. So the first and the primary question in this dissertation is, how do we construct these VAE-like networks that can modify existing image content but still getting this GAN-like sharp image output quality, and without using these GAN-like discriminator networks? Second question, could we somehow use these image-to-image translators, as described on the previous slide, to improve their generality? And the third question, again, a quite different setup, is if we have a lot of images that are actually all representing the same object, such as a lot of images or shots from the same face or same animal, could we use the fact that we know that they are all representing the same object somehow, and we know that with Gaussian process formalism, which is a branch of mathematics, we can approach this kind of situation in a principal manner? And the question is, could we use this mathematical approach to address these computer vision problems? So in the first publication, basically I started out with the HEE model, which I mentioned was very unstable to train, but only had these two networks. And by adding certain combination of stabilization methods, I was able to scale this up to higher resolutions, and at this point made the model more useful in practice. On the second publication, we were able to still improve the results and scaling up these models to work with 256 by 256 images and make this training still more stable and still keep the model more powerful while keeping sort of combining stable training with the power of the model to do this manipulation in higher resolution. So kind of approaching what you could actually do with real photographs. In publication 3, we went still further with the quality of the reconstructions, but also adding this style mixing capability. So now we can do a lot of different semantic editing, different kinds of semantic editing on input images. And here a little bit zoomed out of basically now you can you can actually feed in these new unseen test input images to the model, and immediately in real time you can start mixing them without any additional processing needed. And this is kind of as opposed to the GAN models where you can do this mixing in even higher resolution, but then you are dealing essentially with random images instead of the images that you would like to be manipulating. In publication 4, we switched gears quite a lot. So here we were looking into whether one could reuse these image-to-image translator components, which previously hadn't been done in this way. So we were able to show that actually for specific applications like face aging, you could actually chain these translators together in such a way that some of them you can use recursively, so you can feed the output of a translator back to itself a couple of times and still get good results. And then we were able to find these optimal chains of translators that probably by using an external age estimator, they would then give you the exact kind of age transformations you need or you are looking for. And in publication 5, we derived a Gaussian view-aware kernel, which is something that was needed to connect the Gaussian process formalism with this situation where you have like a camera run of the same object, and as a result, basically you can give if you go around maybe the camera, you can give only the first frame of the image and the last image frame and the coordinates of where the camera was, and still the model can predict each of the intermediate frames, no matter what the camera run was actually, how the camera run was actually taking place in between. So this also seemed to work for this case and for other applications. So in conclusion, I hope to have shown in these papers that the output quality of autoencoders can approach the quality of GANs by only using algorithmic improvements without introducing extra discriminator networks. Second, that an automodulator, which is this specific kind of autoencoder architecture, can be trained in a stable manner, allowing for a wide range of real-time semantic editing methods for real inputs, including but not limited to this style mixing. Third, we have shown that these image-to-image translator blocks can be sequentially changed and sometimes reused, and we have sort of given a baseline for this kind of use of these technologies. And fourth, we have shown that the newly derived covariance function for encoding these 3D camera rotations does connect Gaussian process formalism to many computer vision problems, such as what was shown here was the latent space regression in generative models, but we expect it to be applicable to a much wider range of experiments, also some of them also shown in the actual paper. Thank you. So I now ask you, honored Professor Ole Winther, appointed as opponent by Aalto School of Science, to present the observations that you consider appropriate for this dissertation.